What happens when the most powerful beings in the galaxy decide that human lives are worth nothing at all? This is the story of a species that was called weak, called primitive, and called unimportant. This is the story of what happened when that species decided to answer back. If you enjoy stories like this, hit that like button right now before we even begin, because it helps this story reach more people who need to hear it, and while you are at it, tap subscribe so you never miss what comes next. For nearly 400 years, the Threxian Compact watched Earth from a distance. To the beings who ran the Compact, humanity was nothing more than a curiosity. A small, wet planet spinning around an ordinary star, filled with creatures who had not yet learned how to behave. The Compact was old. It had existed for over 12,000 years, stretching across countless star systems, ruling over hundreds of different species. They had a system for measuring every civilization they found. They called it the Index of Worth. Earth sat near the bottom of that index. Humans had cities. Humans had factories. Humans had even learned to split the atom. But humans also fought each other constantly, over borders, over beliefs, over things that seemed foolish to beings who had stopped fighting among themselves centuries ago. The scientists of the Compact wrote long papers about humanity. Most of those papers ended the same way. They predicted that humans would destroy themselves before they ever became a threat to anyone. Nuclear war. Environmental collapse. Simple foolishness. There was no reason to worry about a species that seemed determined to end its own story. Overseer Kael'thas was one of the highest-ranking officials of the Draken Assembly, a species that served as the enforcers of the Compact. The Draken were massive, armored beings with 6 limbs and skin like polished stone. They had never lost a war in over 2,000 years. Kael'thas had personally overseen the surrender of 11 different species. He had never once imagined that a fresh, young species from a small blue planet would give him any trouble at all. Humanity had spent decades trying to reach the stars on their own. When they finally cracked the secret of faster-than-light travel, much later than most species managed it, they built a handful of small colonies near their home system. Filled with hope, they sent a delegation to request membership in the Compact. Ambassador Renata Ibarra led that delegation. She stood before the council with careful words and a hopeful heart. She spoke about human achievement, human art, human resilience. She spoke about how far humanity had come in such a short time. The council listened politely. Then they rejected the application. Too violent, they said. Too unstable. Too young to be trusted with the responsibilities of membership. Renata thanked them for their time and left with a tight smile on her face. The council forgot about that meeting within a week. What the council did not understand about humans was something far more important than any of the numbers on their index of worth. Humans do not forget. Humans write their history down in books that last for centuries. Humans tell their children stories about wrongs that happened generations ago. Humans build monuments so that no one ever forgets the names of the fallen. And somewhere, deep inside every human heart, there is a quiet list of every debt that has never been paid. Most species in the Compact had left such feelings behind long ago. They saw grudges as wasteful, as something beneath a civilized mind. Why hold on to pain from the past when the future is right there waiting? Humans were different. Humans could smile at you while quietly making plans. Humans could wait for years, even for decades, watching for the perfect moment to make things even. Humans called this patience. The galaxy was about to learn a very different word for it. The trouble started because the Draken Assembly needed something Earth had. Deep beneath the ice of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, there were massive deposits of a rare crystal the Draken needed to power their newest generation of warships. Their scouts found it during a routine survey of the outer solar system. The fact that this moon sat inside a system already claimed by a living species did not matter to them in the slightest. The Draken did not send a request. They did not open negotiations. They simply arrived. 40 enormous harvester ships entered the solar system on a quiet morning and began drilling directly into the ice of Europa, tearing the moon apart to reach the crystal underneath. Humanity was horrified. Messages poured out from Earth, from the colonies, from every human outpost in range, demanding that the Draken explain themselves. The Draken did not answer a single one. Humanity sent an urgent plea to the compact itself. The reply that came back was polite, careful, and completely useless. The matter would be reviewed in due course. The United Earth Council held an emergency session that lasted through the night. Some leaders wanted to accept the loss and move on, hoping to avoid a war they could never win. Others could not stomach the idea of watching their solar system be stripped bare without a fight. In the end, they made a choice that history would remember for a very long time. They sent their fleet. Admiral Diego Osei commanded that fleet. He was a career officer, a man who had spent 30 years training for a war he prayed would never come. He had 19 ships under his command, the finest that human engineering could produce. Against the Draken harvester fleet, they were nothing at all. Osei opened a channel to the Draken commander, requesting a peaceful withdrawal. He warned that humanity would defend its territory if necessary. The response was a single Draken phrase, translated coldly into human language. Withdraw or be removed. Osei refused to withdraw. The battle that followed lasted less than 8 minutes. Draken weaponry was centuries beyond anything humanity had ever built. Human missiles were destroyed before they could close the distance. Human energy weapons barely marked the Draken hulls. One by one, the human ships were torn apart. 3,700 human sailors and soldiers died in those 8 minutes. Sons. Daughters. Parents. People who had trained their whole lives for a moment they hoped would never arrive, who died anyway, defending a home that could not be saved by courage alone. The Draken commander did not even bother to file a full report on the engagement. It was too small, too insignificant to matter. He simply continued the harvesting operation as though nothing at all had happened. Earth received the news in complete silence. Families sat by their screens, hoping for messages that would never come. Leaders gave speeches about sacrifice and honor, but everyone listening understood the truth underneath the words. Humanity had just been swatted aside like an insect. If this story is pulling you in already, do me a favor and smash that like button, drop a quick comment telling me where you are watching from, and subscribe so this channel keeps finding you. Now let's continue. The United Earth Council sent one final message to the compact, this time demanding justice rather than simply asking for help. They attached everything. Recordings from the battle. The final transmissions from dying crews. Images of shattered hulls drifting silently through space. The compact agreed to hold a formal hearing. Representatives from hundreds of member species gathered to listen to Earth's case. Ambassador Renata Ibarra, the same woman who had once asked politely for membership 15 years earlier, now stood before them again, older, harder, and far less hopeful. "We are a young species," she said. "We have made mistakes. But we did not deserve this. No one deserves to have their people killed for defending their own home. We ask the compact to honor the values it claims to stand for. We ask for justice." The chamber fell silent when she finished speaking. Then Overseer Kael'thas rose to answer her. "The compact understands Earth's grief," he said, his voice smooth and untroubled. "However, the Draken Assembly is a valued and essential member of our community. Earth is not a member. We have no obligation to intervene in matters between a member state and a non-member territory. We recommend that Earth accept this outcome and move forward." Several representatives nodded along in agreement. A few looked uneasy, but none of them said a single word in Earth's defense. Renata stared at the chamber for a long, heavy moment. Her face gave nothing away, but something inside her had changed. Something cold had settled into place. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you for your time." She walked out without looking back. Earth then sent formal protests to every single member species of the compact. Every one of them was either ignored or politely refused. The message could not have been clearer. Earth did not matter. Human lives did not matter. The galaxy had made its choice, and it had chosen to look away. For one full week, the leaders of Earth argued, wept, and debated in private. Some wanted total surrender, to accept a future as a small, unimportant species living quietly in the shadows of greater powers. Others wanted a final, desperate strike against the Draken, even knowing it would end in complete destruction. In the end, they chose something else entirely. On the 8th day after the compact's rejection, Earth simply went quiet. Every communication channel to the outside galaxy shut down. Human traders came home. Human colonies pulled their people back toward the safety of the solar system. The handful of human vessels still operating in compact territory vanished without explanation. The Draken finished stripping Europa of its crystal deposits and left the system behind, noting Earth's silence in their logs and moving on to the next item on their list. They believed the matter was closed. They believed humanity had accepted its place. They were wrong. The years crawled by slowly for the rest of the galaxy, but they moved even slower for the people of Earth. On the surface, almost nothing seemed to change. Human colonies stayed quiet. Human ships rarely appeared anywhere near compact space. When alien traders occasionally visited a human outpost, they found the people polite, professional, and strangely distant. Humans bought what they needed, sold what little they could spare, and said very little else. "How is Earth doing these days?" a curious trader might ask. "Earth is healing," the humans would answer. Then they would quickly change the subject. The Draken assembly forgot about their brief clash with humanity within a matter of months. They had harvested more than enough crystal from Europa to power their fleets for decades. That tiny skirmish with a primitive species was not even worth remembering. Overseer Kael'thas eventually retired from his position and wrote a lengthy memoir about his career. Earth was not mentioned in it, not even once. The compact continued its business as usual. New species were discovered, evaluated, and either welcomed or dismissed. Old conflicts were resolved or forgotten. Trade routes shifted. Alliances rose and fell. Earth remained frozen at the bottom of the index of worth, unchanged, unremarkable, and completely forgotten by almost everyone who mattered. 7 years after the Europa incident, a young compact researcher named Ilyara decided to update the outdated files on humanity. She was thorough by nature, the kind of scholar who could not stand an incomplete record. She requested permission to send a small probe toward Earth's solar system, simply to check in on the humans. Her request was denied without much thought. Earth was not a priority. Resources could not be spared to monitor an insignificant species. Ilyara accepted the decision, though her curiosity never fully faded. She kept collecting whatever scraps of information passed through official compact channels. There was almost nothing new to find. As far as anyone could tell, the humans were doing absolutely nothing of interest. If Ilyara could have seen what was truly happening beneath Earth's silence, she would have been terrified beyond words. Behind that quiet surface, humanity was working harder than it had ever worked before. Every major city had quietly transformed into a research hub. Every university had redirected its focus toward a single, shared purpose. Every factory had shifted its production lines toward entirely new technologies. The finest minds humanity had ever produced were gathered together and given resources without limit. Their mission was simple to describe and nearly impossible to accomplish. Understand the galaxy. Find its cracks. Prepare to answer. General Naomi Cade led the military side of this quiet effort. She was 60 years old, small in stature, with sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. She had lost her younger brother in the battle over Europa. His ship had been among the first destroyed. She had watched the final transmission from his vessel exactly one time, then locked the memory away and dedicated herself completely to the work ahead. Cade understood something the rest of humanity needed to accept. There was no version of a fair fight that humanity could win. The Draken alone had more warships than Earth could ever hope to build in 100 years. The combined strength of the entire compact was simply beyond anything humanity could match through brute force. But Cade had studied history closely, and history had taught her something important. Great empires rarely fall because of larger armies. They fall because of cracks that were always there, waiting to be found. "We need to become the crack in their foundation," she told her senior staff during one of the earliest planning sessions. "We need to find every weakness, every hidden lie, every buried secret. And when the moment finally comes, we use everything we have found, all at once, with no warning at all. Are you enjoying the story so far? If you are, this is a perfect moment to hit like, drop a comment with your favorite line so far, and subscribe if you have not already, because the second half of this story is where everything changes. The research effort split into several major divisions, each with its own focus and its own purpose. One team studied Draken technology in obsessive detail, disassembling every piece of alien equipment humanity had ever managed to capture or acquire through trade. They worked around the clock, mapping the exact function of Draken engines, learning how their weapons generated such devastating power, understanding precisely how their shields absorbed incoming fire. Within 4 years, human engineers could reproduce that technology from scratch. Within 7 years, they had already improved upon it. A second team focused entirely on galactic politics. They studied every public record they could access, intercepted communications wherever possible, and quietly paid informants to smuggle information out of alien governments. They learned which species secretly despised one another. They learned which alliances were fragile and which ones were built on genuine trust. They learned which officials could be bribed, and which ones were hiding secrets that could destroy their careers in an instant. A third team studied psychology, both human and alien. They worked to understand what each species in the compact truly feared, and what each species valued above everything else. They learned that the Draken built their entire identity around a myth of unbroken military perfection. They learned that a warrior caste called the Veteran Guard believed that honor was worth more than life itself. They learned that the ancient founding species of the compact, known as the Sylvain, were hiding something about their own history, something they had buried so deeply that almost no living being remembered it at all. Dr. Amara Nwosu led that psychology division. She was a former university professor who had lost both her husband and her teenage daughter during the Europa battle, when a support vessel carrying civilian engineers had been caught in the crossfire. She poured herself into the work with a cold, focused determination that never seemed to fade. Every civilization has a breaking point, she once explained to General Cade. Every society holds itself together with shared beliefs and shared myths. If you can prove those beliefs are false, the whole structure starts to crumble on its own. We simply need to find exactly where to press. 12 years after the Europa incident, the research phase was finally complete. Humanity now understood the entire structure of the compact, every strength it relied on, and far more importantly, every weakness it had spent centuries hiding from the rest of the galaxy. But understanding was not enough on its own. Knowing where to strike meant nothing without the tools required to strike hard. The secret shipyards began construction in the 13th year, hidden deep within asteroid fields and buried beneath the icy surfaces of outer moons where no compact sensor would ever think to look. Human engineers built an entirely new class of warship, combining the very best of human design with the alien technology they had spent over a decade studying and refining. These vessels were faster, tougher, and deadlier than anything humanity had ever attempted to build before. General Cade visited the primary shipyard on her 71st birthday. She walked slowly among the half-finished hulls, running her palm along the cold metal of the nearest ship. One of the lead engineers asked if she would like the honor of naming the very first vessel to be completed. "Call it Remembrance," she said quietly. "So that none of us ever forget exactly why we built it." The Cyber Warfare Division completed its work during the 14th year. They had spent over a decade quietly planting dormant programs inside financial networks, communication relays, and administrative systems scattered across dozens of compact worlds. These programs sat completely silent, invisible to every scan, waiting patiently for a single activation signal. The intelligence network reached its full strength during the 15th year. Humanity now had trusted contacts embedded on nearly every major world within the compact. Some were humans who had spent years quietly working undercover inside trading companies and shipping firms. Others were alien informants who had been recruited through careful bribery, through leverage, or in a surprising number of cases, through genuine sympathy for what had happened to Earth. They fed a constant stream of updated information back home, keeping humanity's picture of galactic politics current down to the smallest detail. By the 16th year, everything humanity needed was finally in place. The ships were built. The programs were ready and waiting. The agents were positioned exactly where they needed to be. The plan, 16 years in the making, was finally complete. General Cade, now 81 years old with hair the color of fresh snow, called a final meeting of the United Earth Council. She stood before them holding a single folder, one that contained every detail of what her team had named Operation Silent Reckoning. "We have spent 16 years preparing for this moment," she told the assembled council. "We have sacrificed a great deal to get here. Our people gave up ordinary lives to work in secret toward a goal that some of them will never live to see finished. Now it is time to decide. Do we move forward? Do we finally show the galaxy exactly what humanity is capable of? Or do we choose to stay silent forever?" The council voted unanimously to proceed. Ambassador Renata Ibarra, 16 years older now but carrying the same unshakable coldness in her eyes, prepared to return to compact space one final time. She would be the voice that delivered humanity's message to the entire galaxy. "What should I say to them?" she asked General Cade just before departing. "Say nothing," Cade replied. "Let them work it out for themselves. By the time they finally understand what is happening, it will already be far too late to matter." Renata nodded once and boarded her ship. As Earth's atmosphere fell away behind her, she turned back to look at the blue planet growing smaller in the distance. 3,700 people had died defending that world, and the galaxy had shrugged and looked away without a second thought. That was about to change forever. We are getting into the biggest part of this story now, and if you have made it this far, you clearly love a good payoff, so like this video, share it with someone who enjoys a satisfying revenge story, and subscribe so you catch every future upload the moment it drops. The 16th anniversary of the Europa incident arrived on a quiet, ordinary day. On Earth, there were no ceremonies, no speeches, and no public gatherings. There was only silence and final preparation. As the clock struck midnight, General Cade spoke two simple words into her communicator. "Begin reckoning." Across the entire galaxy, dormant programs quietly activated. Secret agents received their long-awaited orders. Hidden ships powered up their engines. After 16 years of complete silence, humanity finally began to speak, and the galaxy was not remotely prepared for what it was about to hear. The first strike landed without any warning at all. On an ordinary morning in the Draken capital city, every single screen and speaker across the entire planet suddenly switched to the same broadcast. The usual programming vanished, replaced by documents, recordings, and files that the Draken government had kept buried for centuries. The citizens of the Draken homeworld watched their own leaders confess to crimes they had never imagined possible. They saw footage of Draken soldiers burning peaceful settlements on conquered worlds. They saw sealed orders demanding the execution of unarmed civilians. They saw financial ledgers proving that their revered High Overseer had been quietly stealing from his own citizens for generations. The broadcast continued for nearly 7 hours straight. By the time it ended, riots had broken out in every major city across the Draken homeworld. Government forces attempted to shut the broadcast down repeatedly, but every time one relay was silenced, 3 more activated in its place. The programs humanity had planted years earlier were simply too deep and too widespread to be removed in time. Overseer Kael'thas, now retired and living quietly in a comfortable estate, watched the broadcast unfold with mounting horror. He recognized several of the documents immediately. He had personally helped draft some of them decades earlier. When an angry crowd gathered outside his home that evening, he did not attempt to flee. The Draken government issued an emergency statement, blaming the entire broadcast on some kind of technical malfunction. Almost no one believed them. The evidence was simply too detailed, too specific, and too consistent to be dismissed as fabrication. Within a single week, the High Overseer had been forced out of office entirely. A new government promised sweeping reforms, but the damage to public trust could never fully be undone. This was only the very beginning of what was coming. On the homeworld of the Veteran Guard, the warrior caste that served as the Compact's primary enforcers, a completely different kind of bomb went off. Human agents released medical records that had been sealed away for hundreds of years. These records proved beyond any doubt that the veteran ruling class had been secretly suppressing the birth rates of their lower castes for generations, controlling their own population like livestock rather than fellow citizens. The Vethran built their entire culture around honor and absolute truth. Their warriors trained and died believing they served a just and noble cause. Learning that their own leaders had lied to them for centuries, treating their own people as nothing more than tools, shattered something essential deep within their society. The lower caste warriors, who made up the overwhelming majority of the military, turned against the ruling class almost overnight. Civil war broke out within days. Ships that had once patrolled compact space in perfect unity now fired on one another instead. The most feared military force in the entire galaxy became far too busy fighting itself to threaten anyone else. General Cade watched the reports arrive from across the galaxy and allowed herself the smallest, faintest smile. The Vethran will be fighting among themselves for years to come, she told her staff. One dangerous enemy neutralized, and we never had to fire a single shot. The economic strike came next. The monetary concord of Asen had managed nearly all financial transactions across the galaxy for well over 1,000 years. Every single species trusted them completely to handle their wealth fairly and honestly. That trust formed the entire foundation of galactic trade. Human specialists had spent more than a decade quietly working their way into the Concord's internal systems. They uncovered massive fraud, hidden fees charged to unsuspecting member worlds, and stolen funds that had drained resources from nearly every species in the compact for generations. On the very same day the Vethran civil war erupted, this evidence appeared simultaneously across every financial network in the galaxy. Panic spread faster than any virus ever could. Species began pulling their wealth out of Concord accounts in a desperate rush. The galactic currency lost more than half of its total value within a single day. Trade vessels refused to accept standard payments any longer. An economic system that had taken well over 1,000 years to build began collapsing in a matter of hours. Dr. Amaran Wosu, who had helped design the psychological angle of these strikes, reported back to General Cade with quiet satisfaction. The compact's entire unity rested on 3 pillars, she explained. Military protection from the Vethran. Economic stability from the Concord. And moral authority from the Sylvain. We have already broken 2 of those pillars completely. Now it is finally time for the 3rd. The Sylvain were the oldest species within the entire compact. They had helped establish it many thousands of years earlier. They presented themselves as peaceful philosophers who had achieved incredible advancement through nothing but wisdom and cooperation. Every other species looked up to them as a shining example of what true civilization could eventually become. It was, in truth, an elaborate and carefully maintained lie. Human researchers had spent years digging through ancient records, forgotten archives, and long-abandoned databases scattered across the galaxy. What they eventually uncovered was staggering. Long before the compact existed, the Sylvain had been a brutal, conquering species. They had not invented their remarkable technology at all. They had stolen it, taken by force from a peaceful species known only as the Wayfarers. And after stealing everything of value, the Sylvain had wiped the Wayfarers out entirely. Every man, woman, and child of that species had been erased from existence, and the truth had been buried for thousands of years. This particular evidence was released slowly and carefully, piece by piece, for maximum impact. First came the ancient historical records. Then came the genetic evidence proving conclusively that the Sylvain had incorporated stolen Wayfarer biology into their own species. Finally came actual recorded footage from deep within Sylvain archives, showing their ancestors openly celebrating the genocide they had committed. The Sylvain denied everything at first, with practiced calm. Then they claimed the evidence had been fabricated. Then, quite suddenly, they simply stopped speaking publicly altogether. Their representatives withdrew from every compact gathering. Their homeworld sealed their borders completely. The species that had guided the entire galaxy for millennia retreated into total silence and unmistakable shame. With all 3 pillars broken at once, the compact began to collapse under its own weight. Species that had cooperated peacefully for centuries now argued bitterly and threatened one another openly. Old grudges that had been buried for generations suddenly resurfaced. New conflicts erupted in every direction. The galaxy was sliding into complete chaos, and absolutely no one seemed to know how to stop it. Ambassador Renata Ibarra returned to the compact's central station in the very middle of this unfolding crisis. The great chamber where she had once begged for justice 16 years earlier now stood more than half empty. Many species had already stopped sending representatives entirely. Those who remained looked exhausted, frightened, and completely out of answers. We are nearly at the climax of this story, and honestly, if you have stuck around this long, you deserve to see how it ends, so smash that like button one more time, leave a comment guessing what happens next, and make sure you are subscribed before we continue. The compact's remaining chancellor, an elderly Sylvain official who had once personally dismissed Earth's plea for justice, approached Renata with open desperation written across his face. "You must put an end to this," he begged her. "Your species has done something to our systems, released information that is tearing our entire civilization apart. Please, tell your government to stop. We can negotiate. We can offer Earth full membership immediately. We can punish the Draken properly this time. Whatever you want, simply name it." Renata looked at him for a long moment without answering right away. 16 years earlier, she had stood in this very chamber and asked politely for help. She had been hopeful then. She had genuinely believed the galaxy would eventually choose to do the right thing. She was no longer that same person. "Every piece of information we released is completely true," she finally said. "We did not create your crimes. We simply revealed them to the people who deserve to know. If your civilization is falling apart because of the truth, then perhaps it was never as strong as you believed it to be." But the chaos, the suffering, the Chancellor protested weakly. "Millions of innocent beings are being hurt because of this. Is that truly what your people wanted?" Renata thought about the 3,700 humans who had died defending their own home. She thought about every grieving family left behind. She thought about 16 long years of quiet grief and controlled fury that had finally led humanity to this exact moment. "No," she said quietly. "What we wanted was justice. What we wanted was for someone, anyone, to care when our people died for no reason at all. No one cared. So now, we intend to make absolutely certain that everyone remembers." She turned and walked away, leaving the Chancellor standing completely alone in that half-empty chamber. The galactic communication network failed entirely 3 days later. Human malware that had lain dormant for over a decade finally activated, destroying the primary relay stations that connected the entire galaxy together. Suddenly, species could no longer communicate with one another at all. Fleets lost contact with their commanders. Governments could no longer coordinate with their own colonies. The compact, already badly weakened, now found itself completely blind and deaf to everything happening around it. Every species was left entirely on its own, surrounded by neighbors they no longer trusted even slightly. General Cade received these reports with no joy and no real satisfaction. She felt only the same cold determination that had carried her through the last 16 years. "Phase 1 is complete," she announced to her staff. "The compact is thoroughly broken. Now we move to Phase 2. Now, finally, the Draken will answer for what they did." The ships of Earth's secret fleet powered up their engines at last. After 16 long years hidden away in the darkness, they were finally ready to reveal themselves to the galaxy that had dismissed them so easily. The galaxy had believed humanity was weak. The galaxy had believed humanity was insignificant. The galaxy was about to discover exactly how wrong it had been. The Draken assembly was already dying, and their leadership knew it perfectly well. Their economy had collapsed following the cyber attacks that destroyed their financial infrastructure. Their citizens were rioting in the streets after witnessing clear evidence of their own government's crimes. Their allies within the compact were far too consumed with their own crises to offer any meaningful support. And now, disturbing reports were beginning to arrive of unidentified human vessels near Draken space. High Commander Vraxos stood in the war room aboard the Draken flagship, staring at holographic displays filled with nothing but bad news. He was elderly for his species, his stone-like skin worn and cracked with age. He had served the assembly faithfully for well over a century. He had personally overseen victories against dozens of different species. He had never once known real defeat. "How many ships are we dealing with?" he demanded of his officers. Unknown, Commander, one officer replied nervously. Our sensor networks have been badly damaged by the recent attacks. We are receiving scattered reports, but nothing has been confirmed yet. Vraxos closed his glowing eyes and tried to steady his racing thoughts. The humans had remained silent for 16 full years. Everyone had simply assumed they had given up entirely, accepted their loss quietly the way so many weaker species had done before them. It was now painfully clear that humanity had spent every one of those 16 years preparing for exactly this moment. What do we actually know about their true capabilities? He asked. Very little, Commander. Our intelligence on Earth has always been extremely limited. We never considered them a genuine threat. That, Vraxos realized in that instant, had been the fatal mistake all along. The Draken had been so thoroughly convinced of their own superiority that they had simply stopped paying attention to a species they had already dismissed as small and primitive. Pride, it turned out, had made them completely blind. Gather the fleet, he ordered firmly. Every warship we can possibly spare. We will meet this threat head-on and crush it completely. Whatever tricks the humans have used to cause us trouble, they cannot possibly match us in direct, honest combat. We are Draken. We are warriors, and we have never lost. His officers rushed to carry out his orders. Within a matter of days, the Draken had assembled the largest fleet they had fielded in centuries, over 180 warships strong. Their shields were powerful. Their weapons were devastating. Their crews were hungry for revenge after everything their people had suffered. Vraxos personally led the fleet into battle, standing on the bridge of his flagship as his vessels moved into a tight, disciplined formation. Whatever the humans had managed to build during their 16 years of silence, surely it could not possibly be enough to stand against a force of this magnitude. The Draken would remind the entire galaxy exactly who the true power truly was. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, setting a direct course for Earth's solar system. Vraxos intended to destroy every human colony he could locate. Every station. Every ship. He would burn Earth itself to ash if that was what it ultimately took. Humanity had dared to defy the Draken assembly. They would pay for that defiance with total extinction. But the fleet never actually reached Earth. We are almost at the finale, and if this story has kept you hooked, this next part is exactly why you should like, comment your predictions, and subscribe right now before the ending hits. The Draken fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in a quiet, empty stretch of space, still several jumps away from humanity's home system. And there, waiting patiently for them, was something Vraxos had never once expected to see. Human ships, not 19 like before, but hundreds of them. Vessels that shimmered with strange, unfamiliar technology, ships that moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible, ships that made even his most experienced crews whisper nervously among themselves. Where did they possibly come from? Vraxos demanded. How could they have known we would arrive here? No one had a real answer to give him. Humanity had predicted the Draken response with near-perfect accuracy. They had deliberately chosen this exact battlefield. And now the Draken found themselves far from home, far from any reinforcements, completely surrounded on every side. A communication signal suddenly arrived. Vraxos ordered it displayed on the main view screen. A human woman appeared before him, elderly, with pure white hair and dark eyes that carried absolutely no warmth at all. She wore a military uniform decorated with medals and symbols that Vraxos did not recognize. I am General Naomi Cade of the United Earth Defense Force, she said calmly. 16 years ago, your people killed 3,700 of mine. You destroyed them without any warning, without mercy, and without a single justified reason. You believed we were far too weak to matter. You believed we would simply accept our loss and quietly move on. She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes seeming to burn straight through the screen itself. You were wrong. Earth remembers everything. And Earth always repays its debts. Consider this your only warning. Turn your fleet around and return to your own space immediately. If you continue toward our worlds, we will destroy every single ship you have brought with you. Vraxos felt something he had not experienced in decades. Genuine fear, crawling slowly up his spine like something cold and alive. But he was a Draken warrior. He had fought his entire life. He refused to show weakness in front of these humans, no matter how unsettling their fleet appeared. "You dare to threaten us," he broadcast back angrily. "We are the Draken Assembly. We conquered entire worlds while your ancestors were still living in caves and huts. Your tricks have caused us serious trouble, yes, but tricks alone do not win wars. You are facing the single greatest fleet remaining in this galaxy. Surrender immediately, and we may consider showing you mercy." The human general did not look remotely impressed by his words. "Mercy," she repeated flatly. "Did you show any mercy to the 3,700 souls who died defending their own homes 16 years ago? No. You showed nothing but contempt. And now, contempt is exactly what you will receive in return." The communication ended abruptly. For a brief moment, absolutely nothing happened. Then the human ships began to move. Vraxos had commanded fleets for over a century. He understood space combat better than almost any living being in the galaxy. But what he witnessed over the following hours completely shattered everything he thought he knew about warfare. The human ships were fast, faster than any Draken vessel ever built. They moved through space like living creatures, effortlessly dodging attacks that should have been physically impossible to avoid. Their shields were stronger than anything the Draken possessed. Their weapons struck with devastating precision. Everything humanity had studied, stolen, and improved upon over 16 patient years was now being turned directly against the very species that had taught them. The Draken fought with real courage. They were warriors, after all, and they died as warriors. But courage alone was simply not enough. Skill alone was not enough. Humanity had prepared too thoroughly and planned too carefully for this exact confrontation. Every tactic the Draken attempted, the humans had already anticipated. Every formation they tried, the humans countered with perfect precision. Ship after ship exploded in brilliant flashes of light. Entire crews died within seconds as human weapons tore effortlessly through Draken armor plating. Vraxos watched his fleet being systematically destroyed and felt genuine despair crushing down on his chest. "Retreat," he finally ordered. "All ships, fall back toward Draken space immediately." It was already far too late. The human fleet had completely surrounded them. There was nowhere left to run. General Cade's face appeared on his screen one final time. "Do you remember what your commander said to my people's fleet 16 years ago?" she asked calmly. "He said, withdraw or be removed." Admiral Osei refused to withdraw. He stood his ground, and your ships destroyed him completely. Now I say the very same words to you. Withdraw or be removed. "We cannot withdraw," Vraxos said quietly. "You have completely surrounded us." "Yes," Cade replied simply. "We have." The transmission ended. The final assault began immediately afterward. Human ships closed in from every direction at once, their weapons firing without any pause whatsoever. Draken vessels attempted to fight back, desperately searching for any gap in the human formation, trying anything at all to survive. Nothing worked. Vraxos stood on his bridge as his flagship shuddered violently under repeated impacts. He thought about his long and distinguished career, about every battle he had ever won, about every enemy he had defeated throughout the decades. He thought about how thoroughly his own people had dismissed humanity as primitive and harmless. He thought about how completely and utterly wrong they had all been. "We should have left them alone entirely," he whispered to no one in particular. "We should have simply left them alone." The last thing he ever saw was fire. When the battle finally ended, not a single Draken ship remained. 180 vessels. Tens of thousands of trained warriors. The pride of the entire assembly, completely gone, utterly destroyed. General Cade stared out at the massive debris field that had once been the greatest fleet remaining in the galaxy. She felt no real joy. She felt only exhaustion and a hollow kind of emptiness. Her brother was still gone. The 3,700 who had died in the Europa incident were still gone. No victory, no matter how complete, could ever bring any of them back. But the galaxy would remember this day. The galaxy would remember exactly what humanity had done to those who had wronged them so badly. She opened a communication channel that broadcast across every remaining frequency in the galaxy, reaching every corner of what was left of the compact. Earth remembers, she said simply. Earth repays. Then she ordered her fleet to return home. The battle was finally over. The larger war was almost won. But there was still one final message left to deliver. We are so close to the end now, and this final section is honestly the most important part of the whole story, so if you have not liked this video yet, now is absolutely the time. Drop a comment telling me what you think humanity's next move should be, and subscribe so you catch the next story the moment it releases. News of the destroyed Draken fleet spread across the galaxy like a physical shockwave. Not defeated. Not damaged. Not forced into retreat. Completely destroyed. Every single ship, every single crew member, every single warrior gone in a single overwhelming battle against a species that almost everyone had dismissed as primitive and weak. Species that had been locked in bitter conflict suddenly paused their fighting entirely. Leaders who had been consumed by internal chaos stopped everything to listen carefully. For the first time in many months, the entire galaxy fell completely silent. Everyone wanted to know exactly what would happen next. Everyone wanted to know precisely what humanity intended to do with this newfound power. Would they invade the Draken homeworld outright? Would they demand vast territory and resources as compensation? Would they attempt to replace the fallen compact entirely and rule the galaxy themselves? The answer that eventually came surprised absolutely everyone who was watching. Ambassador Renata Ibarra returned to the compact's central station exactly 6 months after the destruction of the Draken fleet. The Great Chamber was emptier than ever before. Many species had already abandoned the compact entirely by this point. Those who remained watched her walk toward the podium with obvious fear written across their faces. 16 years ago, I stood in this very chamber and asked for justice, she began. I told you exactly what the Draken had done to my people. I showed you clear evidence of their crimes. I begged you for help, and you refused me completely. You told me that Earth did not matter. You told me that our lives were not worth the effort of protecting. She paused, slowly looking around at the handful of remaining representatives. We have shown you all exactly how wrong you were. We exposed the lies that were holding your compact together. We shattered your economy. We broke your greatest military force. We destroyed the fleet of your most powerful member. We have proven, beyond any doubt, that humanity is not weak. We are not primitive. We are not insignificant. The chamber remained absolutely silent. No one dared to speak, to move, or even to breathe too loudly. But we did not do any of this to conquer you, Renata continued. We did not do this to rule over the galaxy or to build an empire of our own. We did this to teach a lesson. A lesson that every single species must learn at some point, or else be forced to learn it again the hard way. She stepped forward, her voice growing steadily stronger with every word. The lesson is simple. The weak are not always weak forever. The quiet are not always defeated. Today's victim can very easily become tomorrow's reckoning. When you ignore the suffering of others, when you allow the powerful to freely abuse the powerless, when you stand by and do absolutely nothing while injustice unfolds right in front of you, you are quietly planting the seeds of your own eventual downfall. She pointed slowly at the representative seated before her. Remember this moment clearly. Remember exactly what happened to the Draken. Remember what happened to your compact. And the very next time you see a small, seemingly weak species being harmed by someone stronger, do not simply look away. Do not sit there calculating whether or not they matter enough to deserve your help. Help them, because you truly never know what they might become if you choose to abandon them instead. Renata turned to leave. Then she paused briefly at the door. Humanity will now return to our own space, she said. We will rebuild what was lost. We will heal in our own time. We have no interest whatsoever in ruling over you or controlling your internal affairs. But understand this clearly. We will be watching from now on. And if anyone ever threatens our people again, if anyone ever ignores our call for justice a second time, they will face the exact same fate the Draken just faced. Not because we desire destruction for its own sake, but because we will never again forget what it truly costs to be powerless. She walked out of the chamber without looking back even once. The years that followed brought sweeping changes across the entire galaxy. The compact was officially dissolved not long afterward. In its place, a new organization slowly began to take shape. They called it the Union. It was looser in structure, far more equal in its treatment of member species, and built on genuine mutual respect rather than raw power and convenience. The Draken Assembly no longer existed as a unified force. Their surviving worlds fractured, their people scattered as refugees throughout the galaxy. Some species welcomed them with genuine kindness, remembering that ordinary Draken citizens were never truly responsible for the crimes of their leaders. Others turned them away entirely, still bitter after centuries of Draken arrogance and aggression. The Veteran Guard eventually brought their civil war to an end. Their new government granted equal rights to every caste and began the long, difficult process of healing wounds caused by generations of carefully maintained lies. It would take many centuries for them to fully recover, but they had at least started down the right path. The Sylvain withdrew from public galactic life entirely. Their remaining worlds sealed their borders completely and refused nearly all contact with outsiders. Some believed they were simply consumed by shame. Others suspected they were quietly planning something else entirely. Whatever their true intentions were, they chose to leave the rest of the galaxy alone from that point forward. And Earth. Earth kept its word completely. Human ships returned to their own space and stayed there. Human colonies focused entirely on peaceful growth and quiet recovery. Human traders and diplomats eventually resumed traveling the wider galaxy, but they never once threatened anyone, never demanded special treatment, and never used their considerable power to bully any weaker species. But everyone across the galaxy knew precisely what humanity was truly capable of now. And everyone remembered. A generation later, a young alien historian named Ilyara Thess, the very same researcher who had once tried to check in on humanity so many years earlier, finished writing what would become the definitive account of what came to be known throughout the galaxy as the Human Reckoning. She had spent decades on this project, conducting countless interviews with survivors and carefully piecing together the complete story from beginning to end. In her final chapter, she wrote extensively about the lasting impact of humanity's response. She noted that for the very first time in recorded galactic history, powerful species began to genuinely hesitate before attacking those weaker than themselves. Conflicts that once would have ended swiftly in outright conquest now far more often ended through careful negotiation instead. The quiet, ever-present threat of another human reckoning hung over nearly every major decision made across the galaxy from that point forward. The humans changed absolutely everything, she wrote in her closing pages. Not by building the single largest fleet, and not by wielding the most powerful weapons ever created. They changed everything by proving conclusively that the galaxy's oldest assumptions had been dangerously wrong all along. They proved that history carries a very long memory. They proved that justice delayed is not always the same thing as justice denied forever. And they proved, perhaps most importantly of all, that the very species you casually dismiss today may very well become the species that ends up humbling you tomorrow. In the end, the true lesson of the Human Reckoning is remarkably simple to understand. In a vast universe filled with countless different species, every single one of them must eventually choose exactly how they intend to treat one another. You can choose kindness. You can choose to help those who genuinely need it. You can choose to stand firmly against injustice wherever you happen to find it. Or you can choose cruelty instead. You can choose to ignore suffering entirely, to use whatever power you hold purely for your own selfish benefit. Humanity showed the entire galaxy exactly what happens when a civilization makes the wrong choice. They proved that every single action carries real consequences, even when those consequences take years or even decades to finally arrive. They proved, once and for all, that the universe always finds a way to balance its own scales eventually. And so the galaxy moved forward, forever changed by a small, seemingly unremarkable species from an ordinary yellow star at the edge of everything. They were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be completely insignificant. They were supposed to destroy themselves within a couple of centuries, just as everyone had confidently predicted. Instead, they brought down the greatest power in the entire galaxy and helped rebuild the very order of civilization itself. The lesson, as it always tends to be, is remarkably simple in the end. Never, under any circumstances, underestimate humanity. On Earth itself, the memorials to those lost in the Europa incident were finally completed many years later. Simple stone walls, carved carefully with the names of all 3,700 who had given their lives defending their home. Families visited often, to remember, to grieve, and to gently place flowers beside the names of loved ones lost so long ago. General Naomi K. did not live to see those memorials fully finished. She passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 94, roughly 4 years after the destruction of the Draken fleet. Her final words, according to those who were with her at the end, were simple and quiet. "Tell Admiral Osei's family that we remembered. We remembered every single one of them." Ambassador Renata Ibarra eventually retired to a small home near the coast, where she spent her remaining years tending a garden and watching the waves roll in each evening. When young people occasionally came to ask her about the reckoning, she would tell them the entire story honestly, and then always add one final warning at the end. "What we did was necessary," she would say quietly. "But it was also genuinely terrible. We helped bring down an entire civilization. We caused suffering to millions of beings who had never personally done us any real harm. In some very real sense, we became the very thing we had once feared most. Never forget that revenge always carries a price of its own. We paid that price willingly, when it came time to pay it. But we paid it all the same, every bit of it." The galaxy kept turning, exactly as it always had. New species rose to prominence. New conflicts emerged here and there. New alliances formed, and old ones eventually broke apart, just as they always had throughout history. But one single truth remained constant through all of it, one rule that no one ever dared to break again. No one threatened Earth. No one attacked a human colony. No one, not even once, dared to raise their voice against a human diplomat, because the entire galaxy had learned, in the most painful way imaginable, exactly what humanity was truly capable of when finally pushed too far. They had learned that beneath every friendly smile and every carefully chosen peaceful word, there lived a species with an extraordinarily long memory and seemingly no limit at all to their patience. They had learned that humans did not simply fight to win individual battles. When truly pushed, they fought to end entire civilizations completely. The Draken had served as the warning. The rest of the galaxy fully intended to remember it. And whenever any species ever grew too powerful, too arrogant, too certain that they could act however they pleased without ever facing any real consequences, someone, somewhere, would quietly remind them of exactly what had once happened to the Draken assembly. The stars would keep on shining exactly as they always had. The ships would keep flying across the vast darkness between the worlds. And somewhere out there, in the quiet spaces between the stars, humanity would keep watching, keep waiting, keep remembering, ready if it ever truly became necessary to remind the galaxy once again why some species should simply be left in peace. The universe is vast, endlessly strange, and filled with more wonders than anyone could ever hope to fully understand. But of every single wonder it contains, perhaps none is quite as dangerous, or quite as unforgettable, as a human who has been genuinely wronged and given more than enough time to plan their answer. The galaxy learned this lesson once, in full, and at tremendous cost. They would not need to learn it again. If this story hit you the way it hit me while writing it, this is the moment to show it some love. Hit that like button, leave a comment telling me which part stuck with you the most, share this with a friend who loves a good HFY story, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, and I will see you in the next story.